So, hello everyone. We heard a lot of interesting sessions already in the morning. Carrie talking about, and I've had some conversations with some people during the breaks, like, but this is so nice, and but how do we actually do that? Like how do we make it tangible? And I think today there's going to be two use cases of what we did with customers. The first one I'm going to present together with Steven from Telenet. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a minute. And then another one is for one of our customers, Allianz. And what these two have in common is that we focus a lot on what we call buyer insights. A lot of the sessions here are for complex B2B buying, etc. Now, Telenet, as most of you know, but Steven will give a quick introduction about the company as well. It's like a more transactional service. It's telecom services, so they don't typically have very complex buying cycles, but that doesn't mean that some of the findings and insights that Carrie just shared is not applicable to them. So that's a little bit the use case we're going to present right now. And just to introduce myself, so I'm Kat, working for LeadFabric, and I'm leading most of the projects within the EMEA region. And as Koen already mentioned, don't be afraid to ask if I catch you in a break. Yes, I'm pregnant. So you can just ask the question, no hard feelings. Yeah, so what I will be doing now is briefly diving into the actual project and how we tackled all the challenges, because as Steven mentioned, like Telenet is traditionally and actually has a lot of local companies in Belgium, a B2C focused company. So what they were doing, they were copying a lot of the tactics they have for B2C to their B2B audience. And that's like the B2B audience is a little bit different, right? They like for B2C and especially in a traditional sales cycle, I would say a lot of it is handled online. They can do it without human interaction. We saw for B2B customers, it's a lot more complex, right? They have more complex needs. They require to get in touch with the human. So we needed to take those things into account before starting with this project. What that actually means and what Telenet was looking for, and I'm diving back to Carrie's presentation, actually a lot of that journey for those B2B customers was unknown for Telenet, because a lot of the journey is been done, like 70% is been done before getting in touch with the salesperson. So we needed to get an understanding of that journey. And that's also like the scope of this project and where it started and how we actually got started. Now the objectives here, there were actually three main ones. So Telenet wanted to make sure to find like a scalable personalization and segmentation strategy, so they could target their B2B buyers with the right message, right time, etc., based on like behaviors, intent signals, like more in an always-on approach, I would say. Next to that, as Steven already mentioned, they wanted to drive internal team alignment, because a lot of their teams were working a little bit on their islands, not towards the same goals. They have their own way of interacting with customers, with prospects, and so on. So that's something we needed to take into account. And then last but not least, Steven already showed a very nice TV commercial. So that's where we know Telenet from. But unfortunately, for B2B, even with the more transactional products, we see that the sales cycle takes longer. So those peaks of campaigns, we needed to find a way to manage, like to keep them high, let's say. So to really, if there's people like behind or after a strong boost campaign that are looking for products or services from Telenet, how can we balance that with a more always-on approach, always-on strategy? So that's, in a nutshell, the objectives of this project. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into like the pain points and questions, but basically it's summarized on this slide. So Telenet wanted to know, what are the challenges that my B2B buyers are facing? What is their decision criteria? Where does the audience go if they are looking for advice? Which type of content will answer these questions? What is the right content? Where in the journey are they, etc., etc. So how we tackled this, actually it's a 9-step process, and I'm going to show you on this slide like the entire process, how we got started, but we'll dive a little bit deeper in each of them afterwards. So first of all, it was important to define, as we call it, a total addressable market or segments for SOHO specifically. Soon as that was defined, we actually conducted interviews with internal stakeholders, meaning marketing, sales, and so on. Next to that, we were going to validate these insights of the interviews with the internal stakeholders with like external prospects and customers. Then we could define like clear personas, journeys, and so on. Then we did a content mapping exercise, seeing like, okay, what's the content that we already have available, what's applicable for Telenet business customers and prospects, where are the gaps, the gaps and opportunities. And then, of course, we needed to match that with available data. Like, is everything that we are planning to do, all the opportunities, do we have the right data? Do we need to get the data in another way? And then all of these things could be combined into like a blueprint for the campaign planning that we also shared with the teams, because this project is, we did it for a specific segment and audience, but of course, like the goal was to enable Telenet and the teams to actually start doing this and extending this by themselves afterwards. And then in the end, of course, if we have all the right elements, we can work on an end-to-end campaign planning and orchestration strategy. Okay, so first of all, the total addressable SOHO market. So Steven briefly mentioned it. So for this one, we are focused on the SME segment, meaning, and even the micro SME segment. So small office, home office, meaning 1 to 4 employees. There are 1.09 million companies like this in Belgium that we know. What we also know is that Telenet is a leading provider. So they had a big portion of the market share there. If you look at both residential customers and business customers. And then last but not least, something we needed to take into account, a lot of these buyers, they were divided over 16 different cluster industries with each their own needs, behaviors, and so on. So it's quite a broad audience exercise, I would say, to get started with, but that's basically where we started from. Then step 2 of that process was to have conversations with internal teams. So we interviewed marketing, go-to-market, also branding. We interviewed field sales, telesales teams. Then we even extended it to Telenet business partners, retail shops, call centers, indirect account managers, as they call it. And then we actually translated that, or had a look at the insight and tried to validate that. So those interviews were really structured around like business processes, how do they operate, organization, but also how do they see and what do they think that their B2B customers are looking for, or the challenges, what were they, and so on. So next, we actually validated those insights, and we saw that, first of all, a lot of the insights, and a lot of the insights are blurred. I cannot reveal everything, but the summary of that is we saw that, first of all, a lot of, like across teams, there was no clear unique selling point or unique value proposition. Like it was not clear because they're so used to B2C audience, that's a B2B part. Yeah. If you would ask a marketing person, salesperson, even within sales teams, like we could get different answers. There were some inefficiencies in the way that they were engaging. Again, not all of the marketing campaigns were in sync with how the commercial teams were dealing with prospecting and engaging with customers and so on. And of course, there were different success metrics. Something else that we saw is that alignment in general was a challenge between the teams, and that customer service is like super important for the B2B buyers, but it's not something, I mean, there were gaps. Let me put it like that. And the last one is actually a lot of the salespeople, they weren't used to like a customer-centric way of selling. They were really like product-focused, selling telecom products instead of listening to their prospects, customers, in order to have a conversation and listen to their needs. Now, what we saw from the internal interviews and also the external interviews, actually there were three important things. So we had startup businesses versus the businesses that were already there for quite some time. There was, within those businesses, some of them had an ambition to grow. Others, they were like, they wanted to have more a stable business and didn't have the intention to grow. And then, of course, there were a lot of important industry differences to take into account. Now then, we came into like, okay, how do we now define personas, as we call it? So basically, as I mentioned on the previous slide already, we made a distinction between starters and mature businesses. Why? Because for starters, there's like high levels of stress because they just started their business. There's a lot of uncertainties. They cannot rely on a network. They really need to learn the things, how to start a business, and telecom is part of it. The mature businesses, instead, they often already have a provider, a telecom provider. So they needed to focus on, maybe I'm not happy with my current provider, but I'm also afraid of switching because maybe I already had a bad experience in the past. And yeah, what if I switch? Am I going to be disconnected, etc., etc.? So that's the four personas we initially came up with. And of course, so we have starters, mature business, and we then divided into the ones that were eager to grow and the ones that were more like risk averse and wanted to have stability. Now, from those personas, we started developing a journey, as you probably all know, with the traditional phases. And we came up with a bunch of questions each of these personas were asking themselves throughout that journey. Now, I'm not going into detail, not going to show all. This is just a summary for one of them, just as an example. But we have like all journeys for the different segments, etc. We had it defined. Now, across the personas, we actually saw that there were four main things that they all cared about. Like a lot of them are risk averse, as I already mentioned, high levels of stress, afraid to change provider or unhappy with the provider, and so on. They don't have a lot of product knowledge. It's like small companies, 1 to 4 employees. They are not even aware about telecom products or what Telenet offers as a whole, because they do a lot more for B2B than just the internet, television, and so on. Then we also noticed across services super important. The starters are a bit more inclined to like price sensitive, I would say, but the other ones not at all. So what matters for them is service. And a lot of them, they also don't know what the installation process would be. Like what if I switch, what happens next, and so on. So those are across the personas also some insights that we gathered. Now, what does it mean? We then translated the insights into actual areas of opportunities. And some of them are on this slide. For starters, for mature, I need to speed up the presentation a little bit, so I'm not going into details, but a lot of it is like content creation, can be process related. Do we need to change anything in the way in the scripts of the salespersons, like anything that we found by the research, by the insights, we actually listed down and we needed to prioritize. Now, what that means is actually we wanted to enable Telenet to move away from static segments, as we call it. So as you can see on the slides, what Telenet did in the past was selecting static segments, defining linear treatment for those segments without listening to like data input or data insights and so on. So we actually tried to switch to a strategy of creating dynamic segments, which we could define like the criteria for. So that's everything we could do in advance. But we were constantly listening to like data, to the signals that we were getting from different sources. Now we'll dive in to that in a second, just to make sure that the segments are dynamic. Like if someone changes one of the criteria, he would change segments, so he would change treatment. And that's completely different from how we operated or how Telenet operated in the past. Now these signals or segments or triggers, there's different stages, right? I'm not going to dive in too much detail, but there's behavior, emotional engagement triggers, transactional triggers, decision process triggers, historical data, name it. We mapped everything out, and we see that's the data availability check. We checked, okay, is there anything? What can we use? What can we not use? What are the gaps? And so on. Then we actually, as soon as we have defined the segment, we came up with the blueprint for Telenet specifically that looked, again, into the journey. What are the journey questions? What is the messaging? What are the different tactics? And what is the channel? What is the impact? Again, cannot reveal everything right now, but I am allowed to share some examples on the next slide. And yeah, the most important thing is that it was end-to-end, right? I think Koen already mentioned it in his introduction, but it's really important to think both about reputation and branding, demand generation, sales engagement, sales enablement, really to take all functions into account to make sure that it's an end-to-end strategy and something always on, something that you can use for a longer period of time. Some examples of what we did. This is, for example, for a person in consideration stage. They were asking questions like, okay, but what internet product is best for suiting my needs? I don't know what I need, business fiber net, what does it mean? So we created this turtle document. Actually, I'll quickly show you. On actually making an assessment, like, okay, what type of organization are you? What are your business needs? How many connections do you have, etc. And then they get like a specific solution to their needs. So we actually made sure that we were able to, first of all, capture the data because it's good for us. But secondly, the reader, they also actually got what they were looking for. Next, for example, in the selection phase, we saw a lot of people actually were unaware about the installation process. And Telenet has really good content for residential on how it is installed, what happens, and so on, but nothing specifically for B2B customers. So then we created a page with like, okay, and with the process, they call it Easy Switch. What happens there? It's a full library of content that they could go to, and so on. Okay, and then maybe if you want to dive into the first results.
I will. So it looked all quite well when it was all being developed. And it gave the impression like the challenges that we had, I remember my slide, we are going to fulfill these challenges. And I did mention, I think, that I wanted to have double-digit growth. So it was great to see that on this result overview, we were hitting that double-digit growth. From the strategy, keep in mind that we were saying we need to have more engagement. And so engagement grew very strongly. We were, of course, in the past focusing from a product-led point of view. We didn't have too much content where we were engaging with customers. So I was very happy to see that we were building these things that are picked up in the company as well, in other departments, because it's a new way of working. We had more in-market buyers identified, something we also neglected, had to capture that intelligence when people were coming by. We do have an authentication process in place, but this goes further. Like the example that Kat showed on asking a few questions. We do use Marketo as a tool to capture everything, which enables us to have dynamic segments, like Kat also showed. So it is very interesting to capture as much as possible information. And it was great to see that we had that hit of 32%. We had the better outreach performance, and it's easy to have a better performance, but it was very high on what we were able to do. And we really focused on having this data-driven approach. And our lead to opportunity, it doesn't seem to be that much, but we're already doing a lot of exercises in the past. so with a very good conversion rate on the journeys that we had. So this 12% is a 12% based upon a percentage that was already quite high. So from a Telenet perspective, we were very happy with the results that we saw. We do, of course, need to scale this over the other segments, and that's, of course, a challenge because the segments are very diverse, but we were extremely impressed with this.
Okay, and then just to close off with the key takeaways, I think I've already mentioned, but the B2B buyers at Telenet specifically, they needed a tailored approach. Within Telenet, a lot of different segmentation models already existed, but were never fully driven by research. So want to highlight the importance of the research here. And then, of course, nothing can be done without internal alignment and execution on everything you just mentioned, because then it's not going to work. I think that's it for us. I know we're a bit over time, but if there are still some questions, you can always ask me during the break.